Good morning and welcome to the Hub Online Series 2021. Thank you so much for joining us here this morning. This is session number 2, and what we'll be talking about today is what tech is shaping the future of payments. It is so fantastic to see so many people join us today from across a range of industries and organisations. We've had over 560 registrations for the online series, which is fantastic. We've got a great lineup for you today. Today, we've got as keynote Melissa Clark-Reynolds, and we're joined also by the Honourable Dr David Clark, the Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, and we have a panel. Now, I'd just like to let you know that Melissa will be taking questions during her session, so please go to the question section on the platform, ask a question, and we'll address those at the end of Melissa's presentation. The others won't be, by the way, just to let you know that. Also, at the end of today's webinar, a little questionnaire will pop up. It is anonymous, so please share your thoughts, give us some feedback on how you found the session today. I'd like to also thank our sponsors, and particularly Session 2 sponsor for today, Buttle Finlay, and our Session 1 sponsor, FIS, and the up-and-coming Session 3 sponsor, Tax Management NZ, and our series supporter sponsors, Swift, Middleware Group, and Westpac. Thank you so much for your support. It's really, really appreciated. Next up, we have Minister Clark will be joining us shortly. And today, the Minister will share his thoughts on the digital economy and digital enablement in New Zealand and how he sees payment systems fitting into the digital economy. I'd like to welcome the Honourable Dr David Clark.
Kia ora. How are you, everybody? Nice to see you. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm just getting my video started. It was stopped and now it's going again. So hopefully
that's looking very good. Welcome.
See me. Thanks, Steve. Real pleasure to be here. So thanks for having me.
No, that's good. Look, Minister, we'll go through some questions. Thanks for sharing your time for this Q&A session. So let's kick that off. And how would you actually define the digital economy for New Zealand? And what are your aspirations and expectations of this economy?
Well, I think New Zealand has consistently demonstrated its willingness and ability to lead in the digital space. The example that is often cited, which I think is a good one, is the EFTPOS in New Zealand, started by the BNZ, I'm told, in 1985 as a pilot scheme through petrol stations. And New Zealanders showed themselves willing to be early adopters. It became quickly, in the 90s, the preferred payment method for New Zealanders. And today, card transactions are the most common form of payment mechanism. And through the efforts of Payment New Zealand, the API Centre, financial services industry, and the new consumer data right, I do expect that open banking will deliver payment methods that again put New Zealand at the forefront in world terms, in terms of the way we do business online. After the election last year, the Prime Minister created the Digital Economy and Communications Portfolio. It's a new portfolio bringing together previously disparate aspects of government policy. And Jacinda, when we actually had the conversation after the election, made it very clear that she saw a real opportunity here to bring together parts of government that were separated essentially because of historical accident. So although it's a relatively new portfolio, it is incredibly important. And I see my job in that portfolio as supporting both government and the private sector to expand the digital economy to really seize those opportunities and make the most of them for our future as a country.
Thank you, Minister. It is a really exciting portfolio, and there's a lot to do. So on that front, how do you see the government and industry working together to achieve our common goals for that digital economy? And what do you think is needed to ensure, really importantly, that no New Zealander is left behind as we aspire to this digital economy and that digital divide that often gets talked about as well?
Yeah, good question. I'm in the process of developing a digital strategy with digital ministers. It's one of the tasks the Prime Minister announced right at the start of our term of government, was that one of my key roles in the portfolio was to draw together a group of ministers who have the interests across government to develop a strategy which makes sure that we're covering off all of the things that will take New Zealand forward as a digital nation. And very early on, it's become clear that there are three kind of key areas to that. We haven't yet had the conversation in Cabinet, and we haven't yet consulted on the draft, but there's three pillars essentially emerging for the strategy. And they are mahi tahi, which is inclusion, the kind of active working together aspects of things, making sure everybody is able to participate in the digital economy, and that includes access, motivation, all of those things that have been identified as barriers, addressing those things, making sure people have access to internet and the necessary skills that they need to participate in the digital economy. The second pillar is mahi tika, which is making sure we do things the right way, trust essentially, and making sure that as a nation we take advantage of the fact that we are a trusted place to do business. When we operate online, people trust us to say what we're going to do. The Prime Minister has shown real leadership around the Christchurch call, ethics online, what it means to be a responsible global citizen in the digital space. And we know that, for example, our cybersecurity firms are being bought up by Australian capital because our brand is better. We need to make sure that we are doing what we can to maximise the opportunity there, but also to make sure all of our own participants, all of our own citizens feel safe online, that privacy is respected, and so on. The third pillar of the strategy is mahi ake, which is about growth. Looking at the opportunity to grow our economy. New Zealand is and always has been a small trading nation at a far-flung region of the world. We've found challenges with being an export economy in that situation, but the tyranny of distance goes away with the digital economy. So that means that we can trade with high-value jobs that are sustainable, a low carbon footprint, and so on. So the digital economy presents real opportunities. And to go back to your original point around making sure everybody's included, we know that for the sake of our economy, having everyone included is good not only for them, for their friends, family, whānau around them, from benefiting from a good job in the digital economy, but also it means that as a country we have as many people participating as possible. And we've seen some great programs. Manaia Kalani's one that springs to mind in Auckland, visited that in Point England School, where active steps are being taken. And I know other large corporates in New Zealand have programs where they're trying to ensure that young people who might otherwise miss out are digitally included. And I think it's absolutely critical to our future.
Great, thank you, Minister. Just one other thing, I know that certainly through recent consultations, you've been leaning in quite heavily to the consumer data right. We've got the Digital ID Trust Framework and the Retail Payment System Regulation in particular. So just wondered whether you could elaborate on what's happening there. There's a lot going on.
Yes, there certainly is. So we obviously want, as I was saying, New Zealanders to feel safe and included online. And I've begun work on two pieces of legislation there, the Consumer Data Right, or the CDR, and the Digital Identity Framework. The Trust, or Digital Identity Trust Framework, that trust framework, which I plan to introduce to Parliament later this year, ensures that those who share information about themselves can do it on their own terms, so that their privacy is protected. And through the implementation of that framework, businesses will be able to save time and money, essentially, because documents won't need to be physically handled. It'll mean not only is it safer to transact online, but actually the transaction costs are reduced as well. The intention with the framework is to make sure it's internationally recognised, interoperable, and that will mean, again, the ability to share across our borders digitally information in a safe and secure way. And as we look to develop that Digital Identity Trust Framework, we're also engaging with Māori to make sure that it's appropriate and takes tikanga Māori into account. So parallel to that, I've also been progressing the work that gives consumers greater choice and control of their data through the Consumer Data Right, which essentially is putting people in the driver's seat with their own data. Makes sense, I think, from anyone's perspective. An example, someone seeking financial advice, they can ask their bank to share their data, such as transaction information, with their chosen advisor. And we think that that should be standardized. It should be the case that people are in charge of their own data, and that will drive innovation in the economy as well. It is important, again, that consumers trust that system. and that any personal details shared through the consumer data right will only take place with the person's informed consent. So there's a number of safeguards that will be put around that legislation to make sure that there are appropriate frameworks in place. You've got to make sure, for example, that the requirements are transparent, subject to parliamentary oversight ultimately, and that they can be enforced. So there's a lot of policy work going on in that space. What we know is that people have found themselves online increasingly through the COVID period, whether it be on Zoom, as we heard the previous speaker talking about, whether it be for education or even doing their banking. Some of this stuff is happening kind of organically, but we know that overseas it has happened well and quick, because the government has set a framework and put pillars of trust in the corner, and that's what we're aiming to do.
Great, thank you, because it's really interesting to look at all of those areas of work. And what areas and where do you expect the industry to take more leadership role on actually making that stuff happen?
Yes, so the CDR, the consumer data right, will roll out on a sector by sector basis. And once government settled on which industry will start with there, and we can look and see it in Australia and the UK, they've started with banking, and we know our own banking sector is actually progressed quite a good deal of work in that area, but we haven't yet pinned down exactly where we will start. Although there's one candidate I think that we will look at. Many banks have said their payment initiation APIs will already be ready in this quarter. So we know that the banking sector is gearing up for this. And that is an important milestone. And I do expect to see banks partnering with third parties to use APIs to demonstrate what's possible and to be a part of owning that innovation in the environment. We know, my personal view is that we're vulnerable to large overseas companies that do that innovation if we don't make sure we've got fertile ground to do it here ourselves. We want New Zealand to have as much of a part of this action as we can. So hopefully in the near future, we'll be seeing some of the third parties bring new payment solutions to consumers and to merchants.
Great, thank you. That's a real challenge to the industry, and look forward to working with government on that as we progress. And just in terms of the role of the New Zealand payment system, what do you think that role is going to be as we move to an open, embedded digital ecosystem?
Yeah, I think this lines up a little with the mahi ake growth pillar of the digital strategy. We need to look for those opportunities to be able to grow without being constrained by the natural limits in our natural resources, essentially. And digital technology sector has been crucial for enabling businesses to compete overseas, to expand, as we've seen e-commerce adopted more widely. Goes back to that small trading nation at the far end of the world. Those barriers, the tyranny of distance disappears with the opportunity in the globally with the digital space. So I'm working on a plan alongside industry, and I do want to acknowledge the officials that have really grafted here, worked hard, and also industry for the huge amount of active participation in an industry transformation plan, and that is expected to create the right conditions for the tech sector to excel further. And in the process lead the way for other industries to become more digitally enabled. An example of this is the process of invoicing. Government's advancing e-invoicing so that businesses no longer need to generate paper-based or PDF-style invoices that are printed, posted, or emailed. And the idea is that it improves both accuracy and security, reduces processing time, and speeds up payments. So e-invoicing has the potential to enhance our economic performance and our exporting capabilities. Makes life easier, cheaper, and more secure for businesses on both sides of the Tasman, and we're making sure that we align there in an interoperable way. And the other thing we're doing in that space is encouraging government departments to adopt e-invoicing. So the public sector is I think got a role in driving the uptake here, and private sector adoption will follow when there's a critical mass already of this happening across the economy through the government public sector involvement. So it's important that government agencies are all embracing e-invoicing, and that is happening. So the timeline I've set for them, central government agencies are expected to be able to receive e-invoices by the 31st of March next year. So they're on a journey, they've got a timeline, and I think that critical mass will be really useful in establishing e-invoicing more widely across our economy.
Yeah, that's a pretty tight timeline as well, and I'm sure they're working hard to make that happen. So, Minister, you've traversed a lot of topics today, but just wondered whether there was anything else you'd like to cover while you've got the opportunity.
No, I not off the top of my head, but I do want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and all of those on this call. It is a real opportunity to showcase a little bit of what government's doing. We see the opportunity here as huge for our economy. When I'm talking to private sector firms, they're consistently telling me about exponential growth potential, and that's something that I think for a lot of people is not intuitive. Exponential is not an intuitive way of thinking, and you know that's a real challenge for government, because we do have to do things differently and be more available in different ways. We're working hard to do that, and we see the huge opportunity here, and we're keen to work with you and with others to really maximise the opportunity here for New Zealand, because it's high value jobs, low carbon footprint, sustainable, and we think New Zealand has a real advantage in the world because we're trusted, and the online environment craves and needs trust and privacy. And New Zealanders, as people of their word, as straight shooters, have a natural advantage in the world here too. So we want to take the opportunity to make the most of that, and play our role as government in supporting private enterprise and government to do this stuff better. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great, well, thank you very much, and look forward to making that happen together.
Steve, thank you.
Okay. As Minister Clark departs, we'll now move on to the final session of the day, which is our panel. And I'd like to introduce you to the panel. Sumia, who is a payments consultant at Split Payments, and she will be the facilitator for the panel today. Now, Sumia is a payments leader and has had over 20 years experience in the industry, both in Australia and overseas. And Mac from Stripe. Mac is head of the Australian and New Zealand, has got a really strong growth agenda in terms of growing those markets and making that happen across global markets as well. And Ivana, head of products and solutions for Visa for New Zealand and the South Pacific. And it always sounds really exotic when you throw the South Pacific piece into it. But Ivana works with Visa clients and the broader ecosystem to develop and implement Visa products and capabilities in a manner that really drives growth across the region. And the fourth member of the panel, Tom Greenwood. Thank you, Tom. Tom's had to drive home to get onto this call because it's in London time. So thank you very much for joining us in what is a pretty challenging time for you, Tom. But Tom is founder and chief executive officer at Volt, and was also previously founded IFX Payments in 2005. Now, that was a multi-billion-dollar turnover fintech business operating across Europe and the Middle East. So welcome to the panel. And Sumia, I'll leave it to you to take it away and control this rather splendid lineup that you've got here today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. Hi, panelists. Thanks for making the time. We might kick off with, a nice open, just globally, what do you see as some of the key emerging and kind of merging technologies in our industry and kind of around our industry? Tom, I might ask you to kick that off for us.
Yeah, sure, Sumia. Tēnā koutou, everybody. My name is Tom Greenwood. As introduced, I'm the CEO of a company called Volt here in London. I am actually a New Zealander, despite the accent. I moved across to London in 2002, but grew up in Wellington and went to Scots College there. And yeah, pleasure to speak with you today. What we're working on Volt is what we're seeing, and I'm going to keep this brief because I know we don't have a lot of time, but with open banking and the account access that open banking provides for in the European markets, but more broadly around the world, we're seeing the rise of a new real-time payments architecture that disintermediates the traditional Visa and MasterCard rails. It takes out the middlemen. And I think the observation that I think is very interesting is where historically over the last 70 years, Visa and MasterCard have had this global network and this matrix where their network covers most corners of the earth. These new domestic schemes and these new real-time schemes, are domestic because they're owned and operated by the banks and the regulators in each domestic market, and therefore technologically and geographically fragmented from one another. And so the mission that we're on at Volt anyway is understanding that generational shift and the opportunity that presents. We believe that the world is moving to a real-time payments infrastructure. We think that that becomes the new normal in a relatively short period of time. But with this disparate infrastructure, how you bring that together, how you standardize and harmonize that interface across those geographies to create that global instant payments network is kind of what we've set the task for ourselves on at Volt, which is a big one, but we're having fun so far. So yeah, that's probably the observation that I've got on fintech is this rise of direct account access to initiate payments in a real-time fashion, account to account, and we see that as having a very significant plan in the future of payments globally.
Right. And actually, Mac, from your perspective, obviously Stripe has come at payments with some pretty, relatively new and cool tech. Any thoughts on where kind of emerging technologies now are for the next wave?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I could come out a little bit for how Stripe thinks about some of these things, because I think we're very conscious of thinking about our users who are like largely merchants. So we're very B2B in our space, so to speak, and of course they have like great customers that have to pay for things. And I think a few places we see it from like their needs is almost like, how do we help them make more money? Like, we're very success based. If they're doing well, like that's when we want to do well. And in that sense, they go to so much effort, like finding customers and then getting them through their funnel. And so I think a couple of places we see applying technology is actually at how do you make sure like they really convert? And so they're like, we're maximizing acceptance rates. And then also we're almost like avoiding the downside, which is like we're avoiding fraud as well. And so I think in the acceptance one, I mean, we're conscious of going very deep with our friends at, the networks or payment methods that we're using and be close to the metal. And so that means like we want to make sure we're passing the best messages through to say like issuers. And so we do apply like machine learning technology to make sure the messages are formatted in the best way that helps the issuer make the best decision. And so I think Tom mentioned you're in the UK, like a simple example, a bit silly is almost like making sure the postcode's like formatted right. Like some issuers like it without a space, some like it with capitals, some, making sure that's consistent. And so therefore, when we've got a big data set across, lots of, payments that are running through, to make sure that that's optimized. And similarly on fraud, I guess you want to make sure that we're applying the data that we see across the whole network to identify patterns, whether it's about how people enter the data, how quickly the charges are coming through, if we've seen it on other merchants in our whole system that we can apply to another merchant to minimize that risk. So hopefully, ultimately make sure the users are having better experience and the merchants are.
Great. Yeah, and I think this point about customer experience is actually an interesting thread through all of this in terms of new tech. And speaking of kind of new tech and new players, a lot of the technology solutions that we see, and actually Stripe's a great case in point, is actually built using existing infrastructure at the core. So, I wonder if you could comment on, what's truly new technology and, thoughts on this balance between what's new tech and what's kind of existing technology at the core. Ivana, I wonder if you can kind of comment, obviously, with new entrants using Visa technology in kind of new and interesting ways.
Yeah, sure. So when we think about tech innovation, I think it's not just about the new, it's about the evolution of existing tech. As new use cases, or as Melissa talked about, business models deliver to customer needs. So when I think about this, actually, tokenization is a really good example, and actually one of the underlying enablers in many of the trends Melissa talked about earlier. So when we think about tokenization, so network tokenization, just to level set, is a technology that replaces that 16-digit account number, or a PAN, as many of the people on this call would know that terminology, with a token that only, say, a Visa or a MasterCard can unlock, protecting the underlying account information. So, I mean, as at April this year, we actually had over 2 billion tokens globally. And tokens are more dynamic and secure than PANs. And when we started using the technology, it was purely for smartphone or a watch payment at a contactless terminal. But as time's gone on and more people are saving their card to their favorite digital subscription platforms like a Netflix or a Spotify, or shopping online more broadly, the need to replace that PAN with a more secure token has really increased and has become crucial to addressing online payment fraud and improving that customer experience. I think tokenization, just as a core technology as well, can reduce friction in the payments process. And many of the banks on this call will know that, to be able to update an expired or compromised payment credential without any, manual updates that the customer has to make is pretty powerful as a customer experience. So in the past, when I lost my card or had to cancel it, my next payment on Netflix wouldn't work and my service would be interrupted. So while I updated it, so that would be obviously interrupted while I updated it. With tokenization, the bank can just update that token and the new card details are there and it's automatically changed. And I know it's a really simple, but it's actually a really meaningful experience for a customer. And I think we forget that sometimes that core experience is what really matters. I also think about it as an interesting technology for, say, small businesses, right? So you think about tokens are also just one-use cards or payment credentials. And if you think about this from a business owner's perspective, instead of setting up a full corporate card program where they have to give their employees their own card, or in some cases, not great practice, but sharing a central corporate card, which is inherently unsafe, and providing the details to everybody in the business, they can just give out kind of individual use cards, which are just tokens, and that person can buy a new HDMI cable, some building materials, or around the coffees for the team. And this can all be managed centrally in a mobile app or platform, and then reconciled back into the expense system. So, when it comes to innovative technologies, for us, it's thinking about, what's the customer pain point? Like, what are we trying to solve? And how can we use not just our existing tech, but the evolution of that tech for new use cases?
Yeah, great. It's a very interesting connection actually with what Melissa talked about in terms of, its new business models and the smoothing of customer experience over and above actually new technology, where the disruption truly is. Thank you.
Could I just add something to that actually? Claire? Like, I think that the pain point's like a really interesting one that Ivana mentioned, because I almost think back, Stripe is, we're actually almost like 10 years old. But, you could move $1 online 10 years ago, right? Like, it wasn't impossible by any means. But it's almost like what challenges are out there and for who? And I think that was probably one of the interesting things we were, Patrick and John originally discovered, is like they had online businesses that they'd actually not taken like a payment from someone from. They've found another way that people were selling ads or, a bigger off invoice payment or something. But it was a real challenge to actually get started if you could build a product online really easily. And so Stripe's original premise, which still underpins a lot of things, is I had to used to apply to a gateway. It took time. I've already built my site. I repeat it again when I go to a bank because I need an acquiring relationship. Why isn't money just landing in my bank account, like bog standard transactional account? And actually, all that took time, right? Like, we're talking days, if not weeks, and then rinse and repeat every time you go global on online, because internet is inherently global. And so I think actually that even was like a challenge that said, why can't I just have a beautiful API that I'm technical, I love to work with, money just lands in a bank account, and actually it just happens instantly. And I don't I was just thinking about problems in a different way, in the sense of the combinations or who the problem's for. I think it often underlies interesting things.
Yeah, and I think just quickly on that, problems change and evolve with context as well. So what was not a problem maybe pre pandemic. So, for example, a gig worker didn't need their money in their bank account within, immediately or straight away. So Tom's commented before about real-time payments and those infrastructures. That might not have been a huge issue 2 years ago, but the world has changed. That immediacy has become more important, and people are relying on that cash flow to be able to run their businesses or their small kind of side hustles. And we can't underestimate that things change. And so we have to kind of stay keeping and asking the questions: is this still an issue? Does this need to be does this need less friction? And what was true, 2 years ago isn't necessarily true now.
Very true. Now, Mac had mentioned about, why can't I just have a smooth and simple API? APIs are obviously, all the talk of town, and they enable this kind of great delivery of targeted and streamlined services. But they also bring, potential threats. They open up misuse of information. There's issues with, cyber risk. So how does the industry kind of maintain a balanced approach to innovation where, we have this proliferation of APIs in a safe way? Tom, wonder if you could share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So the evolution of the regulatory technical standards in Europe was PSD1. I think that was 2009. And PSD1 involved a lot of direct access to bank accounts and robotics and machine learning, and what we term crudely in this part of the world, screen scraping. What we are embarking on in the European context with PSD2, which was I think launched in 2018. Sorry, the dates I don't have exactly with me tonight, but 2018, I think it was that PSD2 came into being, was this more sophisticated communication methodology, which Stripe have built their entire business on globally. In fact, I was on the phone with the CEO of Stripe just yesterday talking about some of these things. But the API communication allows for a more controlled and consent-orientated communication mechanism. Screen scraping is actually soon to be prohibited in Europe. It's already being prohibited in the UK. It's not compliant with the General Data Protection Act and regulations that we have in Europe, and that an end consumer needs to consent to each individual piece of identity or data that they want to share. And it's actually a pretty crude interface, and that you're literally just giving someone your login credentials to your bank so that they can log in and send a robot in there to sort of grab what it needs. So with PSD2, we've moved to, the whole global financial economy runs on APIs these days, right? So I don't necessarily buy the argument that APIs can't be secure. All of the largest bank infrastructures in the world are moving to an API interface. And it's just a much more sophisticated, generally more secure, less archaic, certainly, technical interface that allows higher innovation, more agility. And, I know CDR is what you call it in that part of the world. We kind of call it PSD2 in this part of the world. And there's been a big shift away from that sort of direct access to a more API orientated interface for all of those reasons. And in fact, the regulators are really now in this part of the world, and I'm not sure exactly what they're doing in your part of the world, but in this part of the world, they're really stamping down on it and they're making it illegal. And I think that for me, it's common sense that we would be working on an API infrastructure rather than direct access. And I think that that's a global thing. As I said earlier, I think the whole world operates on APIs pretty much these days. And it certainly just gives you a greater ability to control. An API interface allows you to embed, think about embedded finance and DeFi and some of the things that we're going to be seeing over the next 5 to 7 to 8 years. APIs, I don't, as I said, I'll shut up shortly, but I don't necessarily see that the argument for direct access is very strong, and there is a heavy move towards the API interface here in Europe.
Definitely. I think one of the beautiful things that it enables is a connectedness, and therefore, again, to the point about new business models, it does enable serving up, different use cases in a far more connected way than was previously possible.
Yeah, for sure. And you can embed it into the, where we think payments are going in Europe is where, just being a core payments infrastructure provider, I think is something that is going to drift away and become less relevant. It's how you embed the payment experience within the shopping experience and how you make them sit seamlessly together. Much like getting in an Uber, you order it on your app, and when the Uber stops, you just get out of the car. There is no payment experience. That's an example of an embedded payment flow where you're just living your life and the payments are just happening in and around you, right? And APIs enable all that sort of stuff, which, is the future of finance and payments.
Absolutely. I've always maintained when I work with organizations on product roadmaps that customers don't want to pay for stuff. They just want to buy stuff.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
And actually, to that point, in this last few years, it's actually, a few years now, we've seen this proliferation of mobile wallets, P2P payments, e-cash payments, a whole different kind of phone and device enabled way to pay. Where do you see, I guess, and kind of combining that with this last year where businesses have obviously taken a hit and, it's really important time in their recovery. Where do you see the opportunities, I guess, for this proliferation of payment methods to meet opportunities for small businesses? Ivana, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think, if the pandemic accelerated anything, it's the transition to digital or online commerce. So businesses were pretty quickly forced to get their inventory and subsequently their payment capability online. And this, I think, spurred probably a trend that we would call, Ecommerce IRL or e-commerce in real life. So where the lines between online and the physical world are blurred through new models like curbside pickup or click and collect. And these models actually rely quite heavily on mobile to create that sort of frictionless, socially distanced kind of commerce experience. And this shift proven to be hugely effective, but really challenging. And Max can probably talk to this a lot more in detail than I can from a business point of view, but for the smaller end of town, because all of a sudden you need to start catering for lots of kind of different commerce models to ensure not only you don't lose the sale, but that the process is not only easy but safe for customers. And this is where actually I think technology just added an immense amount of value, and I think we all know that quite well. But for example, having a single customer profile with an underlying payment credential means that whether the customer's in the shop or online, you can identify them, recognize their loyalty, so know who they are and how loyal they are to your business or your brand, and then be able to even provide them with like a personalized offer to recognize that commitment to your business. So it's kind of, this is where the data strategy and the technology strategy come together so that small businesses can be more impactful and dynamic in how they serve their customers. It's not an easy one, but like I said, Max probably got better examples than I do in that space.
Oh, now you've put me on the spot, although a few thoughts came to mind in what you described, but connecting a few dots, I actually think Tom's point on almost some of how the pieces evolve across business models, I think is really interesting that we see a lot. And it combines things, like back to Melissa's call out from much earlier. And I think if I think of a few of them over the time that we've seen, is like subscriptions absolutely is one. But that combining with platforms, like almost like a SaaS platform evolution, there's almost like a journey that a lot of them you see go on. And marketplaces have their own as well. I love the Uber example, who also do like real-time payouts, to drivers. You want to get your money out instantly. Like that's super valuable to them. But on the platforms one particularly, because I think this probably plays to merchants or small businesses heavily, is like you see them, they almost start as SaaS businesses for a thing. So like, Xero is a great example. Shopify's a great example. It's a shopping cart. But then it's like, well, actually, I can help businesses get paid faster or accept payments. So payments is almost like step one of that. But there's so many more parts of that journey. Would probably start to get to open banking and all sorts of other things. But whether it's capital requirements, whether it's different payment methods, like, oh, I need installments because that's valuable, and that gets into this other interesting loop. Or it's all the way through to full on embedded finance, like bank accounts and more things like that. But that all being anchored around the platform and how actually we're all supporting that in various ways, so that they can build a great experience, because that's like the starting point for the business now, right? Like they're not going, oh, I want to open my store on the high street here or there. It's actually, I need to sell my thing. Now I need to go online and get customers, and how does everything cascade behind that? That's where the default choice comes from.
Yeah, I totally agree, Mac. And I guess the overarching point that I was trying to make, perhaps badly, it's pretty late here, so apologies if I've not explained myself clearly. It's really important to set yourself up as an economy, be it New Zealand or Australia or UK or Europe at the moment, with an infrastructure that is modern, that is agile, that can be embedded, integrated, that can kind of fit in with consumer behaviors, because we're getting so much more customer centric globally. Customers are demanding more, they're demanding real time, they're demanding access, information, much more than ever before in our lifetimes. And that's I guess the overarching principle of the thought that I had behind the scenes. Yeah.
And kind of connecting the customer that, this is the same person who shops with me online who's currently in this store. Therefore, they're expecting a connected experience. So my systems need to support that. It's kind of...
Yeah, exactly. As Ivana was talking earlier about tokenization, is a huge part of that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of time, and I do want to get to this last question, so I might jump to it. Just in terms of, forward-looking, we heard Melissa also talk about digital forms of currency, cryptocurrency, stablecoins, etc. Central bank digital currencies are emerging or have emerged already. What do you see as kind of the significant opportunities and the major challenges? And Tom, I might throw this one to you to start with.
Yeah, cool. Thank you, actually. I was actually at an event tonight with the Emerging Payments Association. There was a guy there called Sam, who was sitting with the Federal Reserve in the US and working on their central bank digital currency. And there's another woman called Yana who's sitting on the Bank of England group that are looking at the same. And it's certainly a very, very interesting subject. I was speaking at the Open Banking World Congress a couple of months ago, and I'll repeat what I said there. In terms of how you strategize your approach to CBDCs, if you're a Stripe or you're a Volt or you're anyone, it's a bit too early to use cricket terminology to decide if you want to go into bat or bowl. It's emerging. Central banks are pulling together their task forces and their working groups, but it's certainly going to be transformative. There is no doubt about that. It's going to be a digital asset, and the shift away from fiat to digital means that you can now move money globally in real time, just like you can send a text message or an email. And it's the digitization of the currency that is super important. Then you've got all the layers of smart contracts and privileges and permissions that you can sit on the blockchain that really can be quite transformational. I don't think we know enough yet. To use a biblical term, we're looking through the glass darkly at the moment. And, we need a bit more time to see how this unfolds. But it's certainly something that I'm watching very closely. Final comments on this. I think it happens a lot quicker than most people I speak to give it credit for. I think lots of people think, well, central bank digital currencies, that'll happen perhaps in a decade. The Chinese recently rolled out a pilot of their digital yuan with 5 million Chinese people. The Russians are very advanced as well. And I think that we're possibly looking at a 4 or 5 year picture until the US and Europe are really rolling out their central bank digital currencies. So I do think it's definitely something to watch very closely. And as I said, I think it happens a lot quicker than a lot of people give it credit for at the moment.
Very true. I am reminded of the thing that Melissa said in her speech, which was around, these technologies, they bubble away for a while until, all of a sudden it pops. And I feel like that pop moment with digital currencies is not far away.
No, I agree.
In closing, Ivana, do you want to quickly share your thoughts on digital currencies before we wrap up?
Yeah, just reinforcing that point, I think that I've got to start as 86% of the world's central banks are considering the launch of a central bank digital currency. So I actually think we're well past bubbling away, and I'd say the same for digital currency more broadly. When we think about digital currencies, it's just about how do we move value and make sure that consumers and businesses can access that value. So we look at probably more at the fiat-backed style currencies when we think about the opportunities. And we work with sort of more than 35 wallets or exchanges around the world to allow customers to spend their currencies. A natural progression of that is enabling cryptocurrencies to be cashed out in fiat. So what is the technology and the APIs that can help that kind of that translation process into fiat currency? And then obviously the use of APIs to let banks and fintechs add cryptocurrency options for their customers. So, this is very real. It's happening. There's options to kind of bring the two worlds together. And I don't think it's actually an either or. So I think that's what makes it so powerful, actually.
Amazing. Panelists, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. It's certainly been insightful for me, and of course, a terrific opportunity to meet you all and hear your perspectives. Back to you, Steve.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Well, thank you so much, panelists, for a really insightful discussion, and that pace of change is really challenging for all. So thank you, Sumia, for crafting that discussion. Thanks, Meg. Thanks, Ivana. And Tom, time for bed.
Indeed, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good evening. See you.
Thanks,
I'd also like to thank Melissa for your presentation and that forward-looking, and also the Minister as well. What's quite interesting is two of the payments thought leaders, Dave Birch and Brett King, are also sci-fi geeks. So there's probably something in that. We just need to look at that. So thank you so much for your inputs today. It certainly got my head spinning in terms of what next. Thanks also for the session 2 sponsor, Buttle Finlay, and also like to thank our other sponsors for the series, the session 1 sponsor, FIS, and the session 3 sponsor, Tax Management NZ, and not to mention the series supporter sponsors, Swift, Middleware Group, and Westpac. Now, sadly, we've only got one more session to go, but please join us for session 3, and that's going to be talking about how our customers shaping the future of payments, and that's on the 19th of August at the same time. So also, and that's been sponsored by Tax Management NZ. So thank you for that. So please join us. It's going to be a really good session. We will get some information out to you shortly on that so you can see what's coming around the corner. Don't forget, there's a wee questionnaire that will pop up shortly. So please take the time. It is anonymous. Let us know what you think about today's session, and we'll take that on board in terms of how we craft and put together our future events for the industry. Also, the session has been recorded today, so that will be available over the coming week or so. Again, thanks so much for your time in joining us today. Go and have a good day, and I'll see you at session 3. Bye for now.